Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Sword Art Online light novel review. This one is going to be for Volume 18, which is called Alicization Lasting. So this is the final book in the Alicization Arc, while also acknowledging the fact that 19 and 20 are technically still part of it, but they're set in between the sort of erased period of Kirito and Asuna's mind, which I'll get into as we get through this review. But I suppose it's just to point out that 19 and 20 are still Alicization related. But this brings the arc to an end in terms of its main themes, villains, that sort of a thing. So overall, what I'd say about this book is that I did really enjoy it, but in so many ways, my kind of prevailing thought is that this book is going to work so well in the anime. Like, I think everything that happens with regards to the finale, the spectacle of the big final fights and so on, it's very visual. So there's only so much I feel the light novel and its explanations and descriptions can do to get across what it's trying to show, basically. So I think a lot of what happens in this book will work better in a way in the animation, whereas some of the more technical parts of the Alicization arc maybe haven't worked as well in animation without the explanation. It's, I think, going to be the opposite here. So I think that's something to look forward to, and I think that's why we've maybe noted them maybe rushing through certain parts of Alicization. It's because they're going to give a lot of time to the finale and a lot of its visual elements to show them really well. So I think the best way to say about this is just, I think thematically it just brings the Alicization arc to such a good ending in terms of always bringing it back to what the arc was about in the first place, that it's about AI. It's specifically about bottom-up AI and the creation of them. And I love how it just links together pretty much everything, all of the arcs. Kayaba, kind of him coming back into play, his plan overall, what all the arcs kind of linking together mean, in that just every time in Alicization they mention the idea of like Sword Art Online and what Kayaba's idea was for that project, and you sort of transition from there into obviously Nerve Gear, into Atmosphere, into the Metacuboid that Yuki was in, into the Soul Translator. It's the progression of that technology in terms of what it can do. You also can't forget about the seed that was introduced at the end of the Fairy Dance arc. All of those things linked together, and it's this overall plan to have linked virtual worlds to eventually create a situation where it is the birthplace of artificial intelligence. And that's what this was about, that Kirito and the other characters represent the characters who will treat those artificial AIs like real people and care and love for them, and they are the perfect people to lead to true AIs, ALICE AIs, like Alice. So I thought that was just fantastic throughout the whole thing, and I think it's emphasized by the fact that what this book does is it's about half resolution to the arc in terms of the action, and then it's half epilogue, and there's a lot of focus on what's going on in the Ocean Turtle as well as what's going on in the game. And I think it just has a great sense of, action in a way to it, of just the pacing of things as you cut back and forth, and what are the timelines, what are we counting down towards as we go forward. That's what's really well done. So I suppose we better get into some of the details here as we get into this. So we of course start off with where we were at the end of last volume, and that was that Vizago Castles, aka leader of the Laughing Coffin, Poe or POH, he is there, he's in control of things, and everyone has kind of been taken down by the influx of like the Korean players, the Chinese players. There's just too many at this point, and everyone is basically on the verge of getting taken out. Asuna is like one of the only characters sort of left there with any sort of strength to fight, and the setup is that Kirito may be on his way back because of what Higa did in the last volume, and that being connecting Kirito's soul translator to the soul translators of Asuna, Suguha, and Sinon, with the idea being that their memories of Kirito can help bring kind of Kirito back to them. And what ends up being the sort of final piece of the puzzle is Higa actually connecting Kirito to the main visualizer of the soul translator, the underworld. And what this does basically is it's like fully connects Kirito to basically like all of the memories of Yu-Gi-Oh! And so this is the fourth person in it. This is what finally can bring Kirito back. And I really, really liked how they did it in this book. The chapter that they go through as Kirito returns, I think is so well done. It was that mysterious chapter from the ending of the last volume where like Kirito's just in a classroom, and they continue on with that, with the idea that it's this real character piece, character analysis of Kirito. Why is he in this state that he's in? Why is he in this like coma effectively? We were explained obviously that like he blames himself for the death of Yu-Gi-Oh, but it's more than that, and that's what this chapter goes into. It explains that it's Kirito's like character flaw, like his issues prior to Aincrad, that the reason he was so sort of isolated from everyone else, obsessed with games, was because yes, the effect of the sort of reveal that you know his parents weren't actually his parents, that had on him was that he really struggled with the idea of connecting closely with people, forming strong bonds with people. That's why it took until after Aincrad for him to have a good relationship with his sister, and that's what they go into here. They explain that during the beta test of SAO, one of the other beta testers was actually someone who was also in his school or class, and they actually started talking and getting on very well. But after the beta test came to an end, Kirito, like, this is explained to be his flaw as a character. The second he thought that this was a blossoming friendship, he sort of stepped away from it. And this has been him in so many situations, and him at his lowest moment now with the loss of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is just remembering all of his previous failures and trying to blame himself as being this really flawed person for all of this happening. They explain, one of his early companions in SAO, this guy he teamed up with, and how they got into a situation where he was unable to save him from being killed. That's another thing Kirito blames himself for. They of course go back over the Moonlit Black Cat situation with the loss of Sachi and the others. That adds on to it as well. And then of course they go over Alicization and the loss of Yu-Gi-Oh! And all of these things together like compile on to make like this is what is keeping Kirito from being able to stand up again. And eventually it's you hear kind of in Kirito's head the voices of Asuna, Suguha, and Sinon trying to get through to him and like you forgive yourself for this, come back, we need you. But it finally is him hearing the voice of Yu-Gi-Oh! Again that gets him to stand back up. And it's a great moment because effectively what's about to happen is that it's Poe about to kill Asuna. And you get the cool moment of just he uses the enhanced armament ability of Yu-Gi-Oh! Sword, the blue rose sword, the broken sword, and holds everyone in ice. And you see his gradual return as the power of incarnation begins to be really, really heavily explored here. That in Kirito's Awakening, he now fully understands basically how the world works and how to fully tap into the power in the underworld. That they go into the explanation like that. I think it's Cardinal who explains it to him of like the system call commands, the kind of computer commands. They're only a way to sort of, target, harness and direct the actual power of the underworld. if you understand it well enough, you can do it all without that. And so Kirito wakes up knowing all of that, so he's able to be this character who is a match for like the god level accounts, and so that's how we have Kirito so powerful here, able to do that sort of incarnate sword kind of invisible sword block thing that we saw before. And so he comes back. We see him. He basically uses the release recollection ability of both Yu-Gi-Oh's sword, which ends up actually restoring the Blue Rose sword. It's white now, and that's really, really impressive, as basically Vizago presents the situation of like, finally you're back, now we can have our fight, but I'll torture you even more by having all the Korean and Chinese players basically kill each other over this. So, he's just further just trying to mentally break Kirito in all of this. So Kirito gets rid of that by combining the, I suppose, ultimate powers of both of the swords to basically eliminate that as a problem. So what the release recollection ability of the Blue Rose sword does is it traps everyone in ice and then kind of releases their energy, takes their energy from them and expels it into the atmosphere, basically, as spatial resources. And then it's revealed that the release recollection ability of the Knight Skyblade, his black sword, is basically the perfect partner to that, in that his sword was made from the Gigas tree, which absorbed all the power of the land. So of course his ultimate ability absorbs the energy that is released by the Blue Rose sword. So together, they effectively painlessly defeat all of the players who have logged in from the other countries. So this is the way to take them out without hurting them in a way, like peacefully, painfully do it. So Vizago's plan is sort of ruined in this situation as they actually have their fight. And what I really liked about this, going a little bit back, is that we get Vizago's backstory here, and I think it's so well done. It's only done over a course of like 2-3 pages, but I think it's very, very interesting, and I think well done, because they don't go so far as to make you kind of think that like, oh, they're making you feel overly sympathetic towards Vizago. They do enough to where like, okay, he's a complicated character. He's not just, I'm evil. There's stuff that led to that happening, and that's what's so interesting here, in that you sort of see that transition from just, he was just a kind of normal kid. He had a kind of tough upbringing. They explained that like his mom was Hispanic, his father was Japanese American, but ultimately his father never really kind of cared about him. And there was a situation where like I think it was one of their, like, the father's like cousins or something like that needed a kidney, and that's basically all he cared about Vizago for, was that Vizago was going to be this kidney donor. And so Vizago decided that, okay, in exchange for me giving this kidney to a member of my family, I'm allowed to live in Japan with you. But when he arrives there, stuff doesn't go so well. He's not really allowed into the country, and he's forced to immediately live in the country illegally and go into sort of criminal underworld, and he effectively becomes a hitman and immediately adapts with like no real issue to just being a hitman and killing people. It's a quick backstory, but I did really like the way it was done, and I'm interested to see how they show this in the anime. I think this will come across again quite good visually, being able to see some of this stuff. But they explain that Vizago's name actually means Prince of Hell. That's why his name is POH. It's Prince of Hell. So it's a pretty simple explanation, but it makes sense that, his parents never really cared for him, so they gave him a name like that. And he just, took that up and, went down that dark path. And they explain that how he came to be involved in SAO is that it was a job. He was offered basically a contract hit to dive into SAO after the incident had already started and kill someone in the game as the way of assassinating them. He was paid a huge amount of money. He was going to be paid a huge amount of money for this, and he did it. They basically explained that the cartel or whatever he worked for managed to secure a nerve gear, which they do explain that obviously after the SAO incident they recalled all the nerve gears, but Criminal Underworld, they managed to find one. And it makes sense that he was able to dive back into the game, because they wouldn't have wanted to mess with the systems of SAO in case they did anything to kill the players. So, of course, the ability to log in was still there. So, just a really cool reveal that Vizago was sort of this late login to the game, that he only logged in after the event happened. That he willingly went into this game of death, and he fell in love with just that idea of killing people. They explained that the creation of Laughing Coffin was nothing more than him just, fulfilling that desire to cause chaos. He never really cared about the guild once it became kind of overly big, and then, as we know from the last volume, he just basically purposefully led to the death of most of the guild members by taking out Laughing Coffin, by purposefully leaking out that information to the raid team, basically. So they also explain that he does develop this obsession with Kirito, and to a lesser degree Asuna, coming out of the game, and that they are the players that he wasn't able to kill, that he really does want to kill. And in Alicization, present day in the story, he basically says to Asuna when she asks, why are you so obsessed with Kirito? Or she asks, why do you hate Kirito so much that you want to kill him? And he basically says, I don't hate him, I love him, because he's the player everyone, including me, believes in above all else, that he will accomplish what he needs to do. But I want to kill him, it's just a challenge for him. And he hates that Kirito is in this kind of mentally deficient state at this point. And he hates that he wasn't the one to cause that. And basically is just doing all of this to sort of inspire Kirito to rise up, because from what he's seen before, Kirito always rises up when he's needed. And so that's the setup going into the fight. We do get explained to us, though, that Vizago's weapon, the mate chopper, how it works, that the knife that he has is basically a murderer weapon. Basically, it is this sort of legendary drop. It has the ability of what does it say? If you kill a player with this weapon, its stats go up. But if you kill a mob enemy, just a kind of enemy within Aincrad with it, its stats will go down. But he also explains that there was this sort of quest related to it, that if he did just kill lots and lots of mob enemies with it, eventually the blade would have morphed into a katana. That would have been this amazing weapon, but he didn't want that, because he just wanted to use that ability of it to get more and more powerful as it killed people. So it's the perfect weapon for him in so many ways, and they explain that in Underworld, this weapon, which of course has been transferred over on his account, the way it works here is that it absorbs spatial resources of people he's killed with it. So that's sort of what's happening in all of this, the death of the Korean and the Chinese players and so on. So his knife is growing to 2-3 times the size, and he's getting more and more powerful. And just before Kirito rises up, we do get Asuna's kind of big moment as she gets to fight Po one-on-one. And it's a really cool moment, because Kirito has the Yu-Gi-Oh sort of from the grave inspiring him through the whole, memories of people thing. Asuna gets Yuki, which I thought was really, really cool. Yuki is the one who inspires Asuna to get back up. The character who was so important to Asuna, the one who gave her sword skill. And we get to see Asuna seemingly kill Po with Mother's Rosario. But it turns out that one of the other things of the mate chopper weapon is that it basically sort of counteracts his own health. That once he has the energy of people dying going into his weapon, he remains alive. So even though she basically rips a hole in his stomach and stuff like that, he's still alive, and he gets the advantage once again. And this is when Kirito comes back and does, obviously, like what I said, he takes out all the other players of the game, so it's just the main people left. I suppose how Kirito beats Vizago is pretty interesting in that they just have, like, obviously they have their duel where they use like sword skills and stuff like that. Kirito uses a skill connect where he obviously uses a sword skill, a one-handed sword skill with one sword, and immediately transition it into a different sword skill with his other hand, and this beats out Vizago's I think 8-part dagger sword skill. And what he does is that Vizago basically just says, okay, you've defeated me here, but like I'll just come back because I won't be killed by being killed in this game. And Kirito says, like, no, you won't. And what he does is he transfers basically the memory of his sword, his Night Sky Blade, so being a tree, onto Vizago, which in game transforms Vizago into a tree. And the idea is that he will remain there in place for who knows however many long years until someone chops down the tree. And so this will prevent Vizago from like ever logging out of the game unless he's killed. And if he's in there long enough, of course, his Fluctlight will just disintegrate, because we know, even though the Fluctlight has a longer lifespan than the physical body, it can still expire if given enough time, and he's going to spend more than 200 years as a tree. And the other thing to this is that as a tree, it's going to cut off most of his senses, so he's going to go crazy pretty much like this, because as a tree, the only thing he's going to be able to sense is the idea of, like, I suppose, people touching him. He's not going to have any sight, hearing, any of that stuff. So 200 years of sort of nothingness, and that's effectively the death of Vizago. But the book does some surprising things with regards to, like, teasing that Vizago may have still come out of this in some way. But anyway, Kirito has returned, and this, of course, it's so quick. Like, they have a reunion with most of the characters, and then Asuna has to be like, I hate to do this, but Alice has been captured. We need to go after her right now, because Sinon, of course, allowed Alice to begin to escape with the two dragons, hers and Eldrie's, and now Subtilizer, or Gabriel Miller, is in pursuit of her. And so when we catch up with them, we get this pretty cool sequence where both the dragons decide that they will defend Alice. They'll die basically for her. And we have this really cool sequence of just the dragons unleashing their most powerful attacks on Gabriel Miller. He blocks them, and they're draining all of their energy to make this happen. And they're about to die when Kirito arrives on the scene. So Kirito and Asuna arrive. They both go off on their own because they both now understand the world so much that they basically incarnate, like imagine themselves being able to fly, and they can. So that's how they arrive on the scene so quickly. Kirito saves both of the dragons by basically turning time back for them. So he can't just heal them. He doesn't have that level of power. So what he does is he basically reverses kind of time around them so that they sort of transform back into eggs and can be sort of reborn at a later stage, and gives the eggs to Alice. So that's how Kirito arrives back on the scene. It's a big moment for Alice, of course, because she's the one who's kind of guarded Kirito while he's been like this most of the time, and she's so emotional to kind of have him back. And we get Kirito once again sort of in a situation where he kind of has to sacrifice himself, in that in the outside world, we have to forget that there's still like a military operation happening on the Ocean Turtle. Critter and a bunch of the other guys that are there are still trying to steal Alice on the outside, like guns and stuff like that are around. Critter decides that, okay, stuff isn't going so well here. Let's increase the Fluctlight acceleration rate up to maximum so Gabriel Miller will be able to get as much done as possible. So he turns it up to 1,200, and I think I might be getting the sequencing a little bit messed up here, but I think he at this point realizes that okay, stuff's not going so well, so we'll just go crazy with this. We'll kind of, in a way, blow it all up. Can we pick the lock on this thing so that we can actually increase the acceleration rate even higher? The lock picker on the team tries to do it, but it doesn't work, and he just gets frustrated and shoots it, which ends up actually causing it to immediately set itself to the maximum value, which is later revealed by Higa to be 5 million to 1, which, if I remember correctly, effectively amounts to every second in the real world is about a fifth or so of a year, or a fifth or a sixth of a year in Underworld. So, every 5 to 6 seconds, a year passes almost. So this is this crazy situation where, like, there's a 15-minute countdown timer, and when that counts down to 0, that's when the Fluctlight acceleration will happen, which everyone is kind of thinking this will kill Kirito and Asuna, who are the main two at risk, because they basically established that, okay, all the other players have been logged out already, but the players who are like logged in, like say Lifa and Sinon at the Roppongi lab, they'll immediately be logged out as well, because their connection from the remote office won't be able to handle such an increase in the speed, so they'll be safe as well. So the only issues will be, obviously, everyone in the Underworld itself, like the residents of the Underworld, and Kirito and Asuna. So that's the threat that we have going into this Gabriel Miller fight, and that's why Kirito decides he'll fend off Gabriel Miller as Asuna gets Alice to the World's End altar, which, we pretty much cut away from Asuna and Alice for most of what happens here. We cut quickly back as Kirito does his sort of finishing blow on Gabriel Miller, but for the most part, like, you don't really see a lot of Alice and Asuna here, so you don't really know what's happening, and so it allows them to sort of surprise you when it's revealed that, oh, Alice does get logged out, her light cube gets ejected in the real world on the good guy side of things into Wrath. But anyway, Kirito is informed by Kikuoka, like by a message into the world before the acceleration rate goes up, that this is what's happening. He hears it, but Asuna doesn't. That's one of the sort of secrets he holds onto. So Kirito does everything possible to make it so that Asuna won't stay behind with him. But anyway, we'll get to that in a second. The Gabriel Miller fight with Kirito is interesting in that the idea for Gabriel Miller that we have is that he is this sort of enigma of a character. He is just a guy. That's the way he's explained as. He's just the average representation of this guy. He's a military. He's somewhat strong, but he's not overly tall. He's not particularly like handsome or anything like that. He just is average, not particularly notable, but he does have this just vacuum, this void within him when it comes to emotions. And in the Underworld, of course, like his Fluctlight just seems like it barely functions or anything like that. And so what we have here is, like, Kirito tries to immediately just take Gabriel Miller out with complete control over the systems of the Underworld. He does this crazy attack where it's described as like he generates dozens upon dozens of each of the different elements of magic available in the Underworld and fires them at Gabriel Miller all at once. He, of course, blocks them with his power. And through seeing Kirito do this, realizes himself, like, oh, so this is how the Underworld, like, works at its maximum level. It is just this, like, pure willpower. If you believe it, it will come true. And so eventually we get the situation where Gabriel Miller sort of morphs himself into just this kind of perfect representation of, like, the void that he is. He is just this silhouette of darkness. He has wings and stuff like that. Kirito, of course, is in his sort of black swordsman incarnate outfit. Has the two swords, of course. And he's losing at this point. Like, Gabriel Miller's, like, willpower and his seeming just, like, nothingness is just so difficult to overcome, even though Kirito is so, powerful at this point. And this is when there's a lot of back and forth over the course of the fight that I don't really have the time to go into the exact details of it, but like Kirito is basically like on the verge of being killed here. Like he loses an arm, he gets like most of his lower body kind of cut off, but he stays alive because he understands the world so well that he knows that it's just a vessel in this world, that the soul is what matters. And you get this pretty brutal moment where Gabriel Miller actually goes to eat Kirito's heart. Like, he rips Kirito's heart out and tries to eat it, but Kirito was prepared for this and had put like steel spikes in his heart, so this is his one way of sort of damaging Gabriel Miller. And this gives him an opening to use his full release recollection of the Night Skyblade. They explain that what he used earlier on, before, with the Blue Rose Sword combo, was just this sort of vague interpretation of what the ability of his sword was. That, it's a tree that absorbs things, so it absorbs energy. That's what it does. But he now realizes kind of what Yu-Gi-Oh really meant by the idea of calling the sword the Night Skyblade, in that he now knows what it means. So when he activates the release recollection of his sword, the world kind of changes. The sky is enveloped and becomes sort of just this casual night sky. And then we cut away from the fight at this point to just get the perspective of like so many of the other characters. And basically you get a sequence with like Sinon, then a sequence with Lifa. You cut to like Silica and Lisbeth. You cut to Alice and Asuna, and lots of other ones as well. And you get this idea of, as this ability activates, everyone who sort of believes in Kirito basically activates a star in that night sky that sort of represents their color. So with Lifa, it's a green star, and so on. Ending with, of course, Asuna's star being kind of, I think they say aurora colored, so I assume it's like kind of pinkish, and then Alice's star being golden. So he just creates a night sky, and then it's suddenly populated with all these stars. And that's where the true, energy absorbing ability comes from. This ability to sort of channel, like, basically the willpower or incarnation of like everyone else into himself. And he basically stabs Gabriel Miller with this sword, and he doesn't hit him because it's basically established that he can't physically hit him because Gabriel Miller is nothingness. So what he does is he like transfers this willpower, this kind of data, this kind of soul data in a way of everyone that's going into Kirito into Gabriel Miller, and it basically overloads him. Is effectively the explanation that we get. Gabriel Miller dies by basically having his Fluctlight be overloaded by the power of everyone else's Fluctlight. And it's an interesting one because, of course, it is Kirito using the full power of the system to kill someone from within the game. But it sort of makes sense here because they get into this idea that, like, Gabriel Miller, ultimately, his biggest thing was that he was trying to figure out what was that experience that he had when he killed Alicia, and the idea of his obsession with souls. And ultimately what it comes down to, it was this obsession with sort of the emotion he saw on people's faces when they died, and that he didn't understand what it was. He thought it was something about souls, but in fact it was just his inability to really understand what fear was, and that he realizes in this moment that that's what it is. He didn't know really what fear was. That's why there was that emptiness there. It was because he didn't feel anything, but now when he's just about to die, he really is afraid of death and doesn't like the idea of fear and what it is. And I think like they do it pretty well here of like, he seemingly, he wakes up in his in the Soul Translator where he logged in from, and he looks, he's like, who's this person here? Who's this? And he's like, that's me. I'm not moving. I'm not awake. And it's this idea of, you get this moment of like Gabriel Miller as a soul outside of his body, and he's about to try and go back into his body when the like soul or spirit or memories of Alicia kind of comes back up and basically drags him away. And it's this is this fear of like the first person he killed all those years ago is the one who's sort of like dragging him away to the afterlife, and this is him experiencing fear for the first time. And like later on, Critter comes into the room and sees Gabriel Miller like this, and it's revealed that his body is actually like dead in this like wild like rigor mortis kind of pose where like his jaw is dislocated, his eyes are like nearly bulging out of his head and stuff like this. Like he was having a fit basically as he died effectively. So I assume there'll be a pretty crazy anime kind of shot of that happening. So that's something to probably look out for. I wonder how far they'll go with it, but that's basically how Gabriel Miller is defeated. You know, it's one of those ones where like, did I want something more from that? In the end, I think it's fine, and I think visually they'll be able to, in the anime, showcase that pretty well overall. So this is where we kind of get this sort of transition in that, like, technically the arc in so many ways is like over with the death of Gabriel Miller, in that they could at this point to be like, oh, Kirito's all alone. He'll never get to see anyone again. This is his sacrifice to save the underworld and everyone. And then what they do is they sort of cut to like, he hears a voice and they cut away. And then you find out that, oh, Alice's light cube has been ejected, and we see like Rinko, getting a hold of it. So Alice is kind of safe in the hands of like Higa and Rinko and so on. And they're still sort of panicking because they're like, oh no, has everyone gotten out or not? And as like Asuna basically calls in the arrival of Alice, Asuna says, sorry Rinko, I'm staying. And it's this really great moment of just, she's not leaving Kirito behind after all of this. She dove in there to save him, and if he's going to be there for who knows how long, she'll be there with him. And so she decides to stay. And this is the voice that Kirito heard. So someone has stayed behind with him. And so it seems like Kirito and Asuna are just going to like live out, hundreds of years in the underworld and just kind of have their fluctlights die in there. Of course, while all this is happening on the outside, they're like, you have like Rinko and Higa and so on rushing, now that the countdown is actually, the acceleration has started, rushing to get Kirito and Asuna out. And like I said, because the acceleration rate is so high, every second is like, 2-3 months. And every like 10 seconds is like 2 years, is a year. So it's this crazy situation as like this process that in the real world only takes about 10 minutes will result in them having stayed in there for 200 years, which is exactly what happens. And they're really worried by the time it gets to 100% like log out for the two of them, that their souls will have been destroyed basically, because they've used up so much lifespan of their soul. And we cut away from it after just seeing just a little bit of this. Like we get like we get Kirito just kind of going back with Asuna to meet like the rest of the army and so on, and then we sort of cut away from it and we're like, what's actually happened here? And it's crazy because they after that cut to there's so much that's happening at the same time, because before we get the resolution on like everything and really jump into the epilogue, we still have the idea that like Critter is on board the ship, and he decides that okay, they're gonna make their escape happen by basically rigging the nuclear reactor engine of the Ocean Turtle with C4 so that it will take everything out. This is where he goes in and finds Gabriel Miller dead, and he thinks Vizago is dead because he looks at Vizago in his STL and he sees Vizago with his hair pure white, and it doesn't seem like there's any like life response from him, with the idea being that like obviously Kirito turned him into a tree, so he's effectively put like Vizago in this sort of coma-like state. And then he has basically, as all this happens, he has the rest of the crew load up the basically killed members of the team onto the sub as they go to leave. And then later on we find out that, oh, we're missing a body. We have Gabriel Miller's body, and we have this other guy who was killed. But where's Vizago? And this is where we end on this. Like, we get no resolution whatsoever, other than the fact that Kirito basically said Vizago should have died. There should be nothing left because he spent so long in the world as a tree. Yet his body is nowhere to be seen. And if he just was meant to have died, like, and his body disappear and he's dead, I think they would have said that. So there's clearly some sort of a setup for something here with Vizago. And like, we know there's another arc, like Untitled Ring, I think is the name of the next like major arc that they're on currently in Japan. So you need to, I think, have something to tie into everything else. And so a final confrontation with Po and, you know, Kirito and Asuna, I'd be okay with that. Like, they need to obviously explain what happened to Vizago, but, you know, I can see it as being something of like the evil character who has just as much of a connection to like the VR stuff, but from an evil perspective. That's kind of interesting to have that ongoing character. So this means that obviously like Higa, Kikuoka, Rinko, they have to deal with the fact that C4 has been planted, and one of the other kind of sergeant guys there is about to do it. And this is when all of a sudden Neemon, I think it is, Neemon, one of the robots that we were obviously saw earlier on, the second one specifically, the second model that they have actually built like a light cube interface for, activates. And you're meant to think it's Alice because they've just taken her light cube out. So has someone stuck that light cube into the robot, and Alice as a robot is going to save everyone? But actually it turns out it's Kayaba. Kayaba's sort of his sort of memory copy has taken over this thing out of nowhere. It's purposely meant to be a mystery, like how or where this came from. But he activates, has a little conversation with Rinko, of course, and then rushes to, you know, defuse the C4. This is where it's revealed that one of the other guys on Gabriel Miller's team stayed behind. And it's the whole sort of drawn out tension scene as like, oh, the robot that is Kayaba is riddled with bullets as he heads, you know, slowly and slowly towards the C4 to take it out. You think he's been defeated, but he gets back up and does it. And so the day is saved. Along the way, Kikuoka does actually come in with his gun to save him. He gets a couple of action scenes in this as well, which is pretty fun, but he also does get shot, and for a second you think he's going to be killed, but then it's actually just revealed that he's like faking his death so that he doesn't get like basically put in prison for everything that's happened. Everything doesn't get blamed on him, so he's, you know, he's faked his death, so publicly it seems like he's been killed in all of this. So very, very cool sequence there, but they do just leave it on the idea that like Critter and some of the other, you know, guys that attack the ocean turtle do just escape. And then there's this weird thing as the epilogue starts, and we cut to a cable laying robot underwater. That they basically say this cable laying robot is meant to connect Japan to America with optical, you know, networking cables. And they say that it's been down there for 3 years but has never been activated to actually lay any cable. I think it's like a repair drone or something like that. But anyway, suddenly it activates and is drawn towards something. It's drawn to a destroyed humanoid robot who is holding on to a cable that needs to be repaired. The robot repairs the cable, and we just leave it there. The idea, I think, behind this being that, like, Kayaba in the robot goes, like, missing after he saves the day with the C4. The idea seemingly being that in all of the chaos, he went underwater to sort of create a hardwire connection, I think, to the ocean turtle to allow some of the stuff to happen later on in the book. This is where I feel it wasn't, like, explained particularly well, in that they touch on this idea of, like, the ocean turtle is not going to have as much support anymore because they take down the satellite link that it has right now as its connection, and then you have this scene of like an underwater cable being connected. I think that's more of the intent behind it, of like Kayaba secretly has allowed this to happen because his overall plan in all of this is to connect everything that he's done together. That he wants this situation where, okay, he now has the seed network linking all these virtual worlds together, which is creating this atmosphere where AIs can be created. Now he wants the world to be connected, because they do explain that the seed nexus basically is only really a Japanese thing and like a few other countries, and is actually like banned from, like, other countries are banned from connecting to the seed network. So there's this sense of like, is this also everyone being connected together? And that the ultimate goal at this point in Sword Art Online seems to be creating a sort of peace between AIs and humans, and having everyone in the world be aware of this, and, you know, being able to have these two fully functional worlds that people can live in or not live in, and the AIs can live in the real world if they want to, humans can live in the virtual world. It doesn't matter. That seems to be the style of thing that they're going for, which seems very, very interesting to me in terms of just kind of thematically what this has done with its world building. So to allow that to happen, I think that's what the whole cable sequence was about. But then you cut to Rinko leading a news conference where they're announcing the very first ALICE AI, and it's Alice. And you're wondering the whole time of like, okay, what way are they going to do this? Because the two robots that we've seen so far look nothing like, you know, actual humans. They're very much, you know, kind of Gundam almost style robots. But when Alice is brought out on stage, it is revealed that they made a third robot that looks much more, it's like super lifelike. They still get across the idea in the descriptions here that, like, I suppose close up it's clear that it is an artificial body, but that it looks very, very similar to the way Alice actually looked in game. So she has this body that more resembles her own body, and she comes out on stage, interestingly, wearing the school uniform of the SAO Survivor School. That is something that she demanded to wear. And you get just this really cool news conference of like them announcing the very first bottom-up AI to the world. And there's a really cool sequence because like initially it's Rinko just talking a lot, explaining stuff, and then one of the first questions from reporters is like, can you show us that you are a robot actually deep down? And they're all like, wait, what do you want me to do? And he just says that, oh, can you open up your head to show us your like digital brain basically? And she counters, Alice speaks up and is like, can you prove to me that you're a human? And he's like, I am a human, like I just am. And she's like, no, I want you to open up your head and show me your brain. And so it's just this like really kind of clever thing that shows that she is not just a kind of computer program of just like, she has that humor, that kind of, smart quickness in a way that like you wouldn't maybe expect from someone like a Yui that's more information based, that she has this sort of humor and kind of emotion to it as well. And she eventually gets to a point where she talks, just the way she talks as well, I think makes it clear that she calls them like real worlders, and she's kind of different from them. But she does mention that like there is one real worlder who I love, and I'm sad that I might never get to see him again. It, obviously suggesting the idea that while they did manage to log Kirito and Asuna out, they hadn't woken up in the immediate sort of weeks following their log out. So they're still, up in the air as to whether they'll be okay or not. And eventually what happens is that they do wake up, and Alice is immediately alerted to this fact. So she rushes off from the news conference to go and see them. And so they do wake up. There's a little bit of dialogue here that makes it clear that, like, especially Kirito gets most of the dialogue, that he's different. Like, his personality is a little bit different. Like, his sort of manner of speech is a little bit more formal, because this is effectively, 200 and like 20-year-old Kirito basically talking to them. So I like the way they slightly changed up the sort of dialogue for Kirito here. But he says, our role is done, erase our memories now. So they get like basically 200 years of memories of being in the game erased by Higa. So they're sort of back to normal. So Kirito, he basically just has his memories up until the fight with Gabriel Miller, and then about like 10 minutes after that they still keep as well. So most of it is gone. So it does create this kind of time period where we need to learn more about, because the book does go into some of that here in terms of explaining that, like, okay, Kirito, like, one of the things that Kirito says before they even explain any of it is like, he's like, myself and Her Majesty, clearly referring to Asuna. So like, oh, like King Kirito here, Queen Asuna, okay. And then we get the details later on. It's just so weird to read for the first time, but also very cool to know that they become leaders. They become like the protectors of the underworld in there. And we see that like Iskan sort of becomes the de facto leader of the Dark Territory forces and so on. They don't really lead into it that much, which is why I lean into explaining a lot of what happens to like the other characters, which to me is why I think volume 19 and 20 are actually so important, to have those stories where you go back and give the sort of resolution to characters like Iskan, Sheita, and so on. So I think that's why I think Moon Cradle, the next arc, is actually very important before Unital Ring. Next, where am I? Like, it's all over the place here. They do reveal, though, Higa didn't delete Kirito's memories. He actually just copied them. He deleted them from Kirito himself, but actually took a copy of them. And so on his own, it's revealed that he is actually talking to the sort of copy of Kirito's consciousness from those 200 years. So he's talking to, as we find out here, Star King Kirito here. So this 220 or so year old person that he couldn't delete because it was the oldest person in the world. That's the intrigue for him, and so we get this kind of, back and forth between them as like Kirito talks about the importance of making sure the underworld is kept active for as long as possible to, make sure that there is hope into the future for the people of the underworld, AIs, and so on. And it's implied that like he like knows that Kaiba is still alive and stuff like that, even though he didn't see any of what Kaiba did in the present, like on the ocean turtle. So some interesting stuff clearly happens in those 200 years that he spends. But it's so cool to see just this very like ancient Kirito almost like talking to them. It's a different character, but it's sort of still him. And this is obviously when we get like Kirito waking up and so on. Pretty much after this, it's just kind of a lot of quick scenes, just wrapping stuff up. The main one is actually that Alice ends up like going missing, and it's revealed that she actually posted herself from the sort of the offices of Wrath to Kirito's house. So it's this fun moment where Kirito opens up the package and has to sort of not reassemble Alice, but like help her kind of fix her joints around so that like she's normal again. And they just kind of have this pretty cool conversation. She wanted to see him, and she ends up sort of staying the night, and she actually has sort of like dinner with the family. And it's actually a cool scene because I think it's probably like the only time we really get to see Kirito's dad, or like Sugaha's dad, talk to Kirito. And so we see that like Kirito obviously views him as being a more sort of serious or maybe stricter person, and he's like, yes sir, but there's a fun moment where like his father's like quizzing him about, okay, so what is your plan for the future? And Kirito actually reveals he actually has changed his mind after the Alicization experience. He doesn't want to go to America anymore and do that style of research. He wants to stay in Japan and do a different style of research that is more focused on the whole AI stuff. He wants to do everything he can to help Alice and everything going on there to happen. He wants ultimately the connection to the underworld to be started again, so Alice can go back to her world, because they reveal that Selka had put herself in deep freeze so that one day she and Alice could meet again. So that's a nice thing of like, oh, that's a cool application of that deep freeze thing of like it keeps an underworldian alive for a very long time. So Alice and Selka will get their chance to reunite, meet again. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, that night they sort of discuss things, and Alice gets a message, a sort of encoded message from the network about something. And there's a very fun moment where Kirito actually, he takes out the sort of shoulder camera that he has, that acts as like Yui in the real world. And Yui and Alice are talking and discussing how to solve this kind of problem. And Kirito just notes that, like, what a weird situation this is. You know, a top-down AI talking completely friendly to a bottom-up AI. Just these two different types of AI that are different people who are both very important to Kirito. And this is what's going on. So very, very fun scene. And then they figure out that, oh, it's some sort of a like IP address, and oh, like it's a way back into the underworld. And so Kirito calls Asuna, and together the three of them dive back into the they head off to, obviously, Wrath, go in on some soul translators back into the world, you know, all these years later, because of course, you know, in between then and now so much time has passed, like it's potentially thousands of years later. So when they jump in, the book actually cuts to the perspective of two female, what do they call them, dragoncraft pilots, and you know by the names that they are descendants of Ronye and Ties. They obviously have different names, and they're pilots, and they kind of explain that in the many years that have passed, that the idea of integrity knights has sort of switched into now being the pilots of these dragoncraft, and they still can use like the arts and stuff like that, but they are pilots, and that it's a more spacefaring thing, and that Star King Kirito invented these spacecraft and allowed the world to change and so on, that he and his queen Asuna led to peace in the world and all this amazing stuff that they did. If there was any threat, if there was ever a threat, Kirito tried to resolve it with peace, but if he had to, he fought it off. And eventually the two of them encounter in space this abyssal horror, which is what they call it, this legendary mythical space beast, the only thing that Star King Kirito was never able to defeat. But he did send it running away. So they're seemingly about to be destroyed by the beast, which is when Kirito arrives. And we get this cool sequence where Kirito uses all of his power and nearly destroys the thing. Asuna comes in, uses all of her power, and basically leaves the creature in a state of like it's dust. But they basically explain that the legend told that the first time Kirito encountered this beast, he got it to this point. He and Asuna got it to the point where it was disassembled into all these kind of parts, but it then sort of reassembled itself and ran off. So this is where them bringing Alice with them, who wasn't there the first time, comes in handy. She uses her release recollection on her sword, and of course it splits up into a million parts. Those a million parts destroy the million parts of the beast, and they're back. And the idea is that Star King Kirito, before he left behind sort of a prophecy that like one day they'd return, and here it is, them returning to the people. So very, very cool sort of, ending to the book there, just on that fun note of like, Alice can kind of go back to her world, she'll see Selka again, but it's a very different and changed world, but that there is all that storytelling potential to tell a story set in the 200 years, which is what I believe the Mooncradle arc actually is. So yeah, like so much happens in this, but I was in general very, very pleased with it. Just the way they did most of the kind of resolution, the big character moments. Like I think it's to the point where like the only real frustration was just that like even by the end of the book, they're still sort of teasing that sort of rivalry, jealousy between Asuna and Alice, which is like, okay, that's the character dynamic you're going for between the two, but I don't think anyone particularly enjoys kind of romance drama type stuff. Now ultimately, just the whole Star King and Queen Kirito and Asuna thing makes it abundantly clear that they're not changing the ship, like Alice isn't going to get in the way of their relationship. But because of that, like, why then have even in any way of a jealousy angle? Like, it just, I think it detracts a little bit away from Alice's personality that you have her acting like that around him. Yes, she said that she loves Kirito, but I think you should use that more from the plot perspective of that love sort of proves to people that she is real. She's different than like other computer programs that have come before. So yeah, that's volume 18. I think the best thing I can say about it coming out of it is just that I really enjoyed it, and I think that the way it's written, the way it tells its story, should make for amazing anime episodes. I think so many of the visual moments that happen here are going to, I think, work so much better in animation. Vizago'S backstory, like how Vizago is defeated, the whole fight with the whole mate chopper, and how they visually show that. The idea of, like, you know, kind of like almost the spirit of Yuki enhancing Asuna's power, the spirit of Yu-Gi-Oh at multiple times enhancing Kirito's power as he defeats Poe and then Gabriel Miller. Especially the Gabriel Miller Kirito fight, I think, kind of needs the visuals behind it just to get across Gabriel's transformation into kind of nothingness. The showcase of the true power of the Night Sky Blade, the details surrounding, you know, how Gabriel dies with the whole transfer of all that incarnation energy into him. That sort of stuff, I think, needs the visuals. Even the moments like what Kayaba specifically does, and how they show Vizago and his kind of death, but maybe not. A lot of that, I think, is going to work very well in the anime, and I think that's what they've done. They've rushed through a few things so that they have all the time in the world in the last arc to just cover the remainder of Volume 17, and then focus all their time on 18. I don't think Mooncradle is going to be in any way incorporated into this. If they do, it probably, I think, is going to be just like a recap through it, but I think they will probably leave it until what's happening next, as maybe a kind of one-off kind of season thing they do at some point down the line, just to cover the 2 arcs of the Mooncradle as like an event style thing. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Sword Art Online light novel volume 18, Alicization Lasting, the finale of the Alicization Arc. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on this book, on the video. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.